So a while back was Pressure's 1-year anniversary, in which they announced a 4-part update. The most notable part, though, was the 4th part, in which they stated that they plan to do a complete overhaul of the game. So what does this mean? Well, it is what it sounds like. They're completely separating themselves from the standard door-type gameplay style and creating a whole new way of playing the game. I'll show the screenshots of everything they've said here, so feel free to pause the video if you'd like to read. Now, because of their plans to make such a huge update and such a drastic change, this has caused a lot of reasonable concerns. Will it still be fun to play the game, or will it drive more players away? Well, thankfully, the devs are trying to address these concerns with their announcements, but also through the update. Before I get onto that though, I'd like to note these 3 questions as the biggest concerns, which I'll be talking about. Will the game appeal to their audience? Will the game be inviting to new players? And what will happen to both versions of Pressure? These 3 questions are ones that are very important to address, especially when considering making such a drastic change. So let's get into discussing them. First off, will the game still appeal to their audience? I'd arguably say this is the most important aspect to focus on, especially since Pressure doesn't have such a massive player base like a more popular game like Doors. For starters, Pressure has a typical player base of 2k to 20k players during times with no updates or hype. So making sure that the game appeals to the current audience is essential. Now, thankfully, as I stated, the devs are focusing on this a lot, and they have added that they are trying to make this fun. Not only that, but they do plan to have testing available for players when Part 4 does come around. So this will help out making the game more appealing by receiving community feedback. Now about the actual concerns. It's true that this change will mean that some players will just straight up hate it, and that's something that will happen. People love Pressure the way it is already, and such a huge change obviously won't be appealing to all people. That's just a matter of fact. Plus, there's always the factor of people always clinging to nostalgia, so Pressure will always probably have a huge player base of people still liking the old version, even if they do like the new one. There definitely isn't any way to get all players to like the new version, obviously, but knowing that the dev team is going to take community feedback seriously, the most we can really do is give our commentary and our feedback, both good and bad, as well as being open to any new ideas. I myself am kind of concerned about this, however, I do know that Pressure has a pretty loyal fanbase, so I'm pretty sure that this won't affect the player count overall. If anything, this might just bring in new players, which leads us on to our next topic. Before I get onto that though, you should totally consider subscribing, liking, all that. And if you like content like this, just cause, we're pretty close to hitting 15k, so that'd be cool. Okay, thank you. Secondly, will the game be inviting to new players? Here's the thing, personally, I'm heavily leaning towards yes. The Doors type gameplay loop is one that many are already satisfied with, especially with the more popular game Doors. I have some friends who just never tried out playing Pressure just because they believed it was a Doors clone. And while everyone who has played Pressure knows that this just isn't true, the fact that Pressure has a similar gameplay styles to Doors does make it a bit uninteresting to many people. Another point that I subjectively have is that honestly, I don't think the Pressure we currently have is inviting to new players at all. When Pressure first got popularized, I felt as though it definitely was more inviting to new players. Obviously, there is a little bias when it comes to that because more people were new, so we were all figuring it out. However, Pressure has added so many more mechanics to the game since its initial popularity in the summer of 2024, especially with the recent Worth the Wait update. At first, Pressure had a very, very similar gameplay style to Doors, which while it did turn players away, it also brought a lot of players in for that very reason. Not only that, but the entities and mechanics were pretty basic to understand in a first run, just through visual cues and trial and error. Nowadays, especially with the 4.5 and Worth the Wait updates, there are so many more new mechanics that can genuinely be super confusing to new players, and can't be so easily figured out on a first run just through visual cues, nor with some basic trial and error. I'm not saying these updates are bad, but they add so much more complexity to the game, which while very fun and engaging for older players, does mean it did get harder for new players to enter into Pressure. Now, what does this have to do with the overhaul? Frankly, I think the overhaul will be more inviting to new players, which might seem contradictory. Not just because of pressure showcasing a playstyle different from Doors, which could bring new players in, but because it means that older players and newer ones will all be having a new experience. It's basically bringing back pressure from the beginning. Remember what I said about how some current players would probably dislike the overhaul? The reason I believe Pressure will be able to keep its current player count and player numbers is because of this refresh. Older players who love the old version of Pressure will stop playing the new version, but I do believe that the new players will come in to fill in that gap. Of course, there is no way of knowing what could happen, but this is just the idea of something that could. Now, lastly, what will happen to both versions of Pressure? If you didn't read the announcement for yourself or see the screenshots at the beginning of the video, then let me recap this part for you. Pressure will be having two different versions of the game. The new version, which will be the main game itself, and the old version, which will be a legacy game. If you've played Doors before, doesn't this sound familiar to you or remind you of a certain something? Yeah, Hotel Minus and Hotel Plus. Now here's the thing though, this will be entirely different. While Hotel Plus was a huge update to Doors and changed a lot of the main base mechanics in the game, both Doors versions kept the overall same gameplay loop, but this will be entirely different. Not only will they be two entirely separate games, but I believe that this will be more like a Shark Bite and Shark Bite 2 situation, where the older version of the game still has a good amount of players, but the newer version of course will have the main player base. I honestly love the fact that they're doing two separate games rather than just an in-game mode, as it pushes the new update as the game itself rather than just another update. It also just helps with making people try out the new update more, since a lot of people would be hesitant to try it. There's not a lot to say about this though, since it's pretty hard to tell how this will turn out, but from a general perspective of my viewpoint, I do think that it'll be more like a Shark Bite situation rather than a Hotel Plus and a Hotel Minus situation, just because of how drastic the change is. Everyone will have different views of the update once we see more come out about it. However, I have faith that the developers will listen to the community, especially with how good each update prior to this has been. Worth the Wait was the best update we've gotten so far in my opinion, so I trust that the developers know their players. For everyone who is skeptical about the update, obviously, you have the right to have your doubts, as I definitely do as well, but I advise you guys to stay open-minded about this, especially since I'm sure that the developers themselves know about how much this update is a leap of faith. As I said though, the current player base is generally very loyal, and none of their prior updates have been straight up horrible or bad in the slightest, so I do think that the current player base will stick around. Hopefully, and maybe, this will bring in some new players too, but tell me what y'all think. Oh, and also, subscribe, like, drink water.